What up, world? This is the GoalNet recording live here outside of Chicago. And today we are going to do a deep dive on the new Sportmask Pro3i. Filming this video in middle of March, and this mask is expected to be in retail probably about 30 to 60 days from now. So I'd say that this will be available in stores probably in the April-May timeframe. So if you're not familiar with Sportmask, they've been around for quite a long time, 10 plus years. Tony Perillo was the mask maker, and recently Sportmask merged with Otney, and now we've got the two companies becoming as one. So every single piece of this mask just about is made in-house in Canada between the two companies. So Sportmask doing the shell, and then Otney doing the cage. And we'll dive into some other points later about the big emphasis on made in Canada with this mask. So if you're not familiar with Sportmask further than what I've just said, they've been worn by a lot of Stanley Cup winning goaltenders, which is kind of interesting. Cam Ward wears their mask, Jonathan Quick wears their mask, and Tim Thomas previously wore their mask, and those are three of their highest profile clients. They're one of those brands to me that reminds me a lot of something like True Skates or Brown chest protectors, where I've never really heard too much negative about the product, and they really have a cult-like following. And a lot of that is gained by word of mouth, people using the equipment and putting really good feedback on places like thegoalnet.com, Instagram, Goalie Store, GGSU, etc., or retail people loving them. One of the reasons I was very interested in testing this mask is that 3 or 4 of the shops that I've become close with, be the Goalie Crease outside of Toronto, the guys out west at Pro Skate Goal, and then Johnny used to work at Goalie Heaven, all gave me rave reviews about how great Sportmask product was, and I'd never worn one. And so I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity again. This is the new Pro3i. This is a different mask than the Pro3. The Pro3 is the mask that Jonathan Quick wears. So let's take a deep dive on the specs and go through what's new with this mask. So the first thing you will notice when you put this mask on is the sight lines are absolutely outstanding. This is the first mask I can say that I've ever worn where you never see the cage or you never see any pieces of the mask window when you're wearing it. And that's actually one of the big emphasis that Sportmask made transitioning to the Pro3 to the Pro3i. They went through 2 different types of testing that they had never done before. The first type of testing that they did is photometric testing. Now what that is actually shining light through the face opening on this and measuring how much light actually gets through. And the hypothesis that Sportmask had was that the more light that gets through the cage and the window, the better visibility the goaltender will have. And they got to the point where they were moving the cage, a quarter of an inch, a few millimeters here and there to really try and maximize the numbers that they were getting back on this testing. And that's actually a really good segue to the other key piece of technology used with this mask, and that was the use of 3D printing, 3D scanning, and CAD. So how Sportmask went around making this mask is that their legendary mask maker, Tony Perillo, actually made his initial mask and what he thought the mask should look like. Then they went out and had an independent company 3D scan Tony's original mask mock-up so that they had a digital representation in CAD. If you're not familiar with CAD, that's computer-aided design. It's a very common tool used in basically every type of manufacturing on Earth these days to design product. So that's everything from people at Apple designing iPhones to people at car companies, people making airplanes, even the guys making hockey sticks, skate runners are using CAD to design their programs on computers. So once they had a digital file of this mask, they 3D printed a shell out of a plastic using an FDM style printing and actually mounted the cage to it. Then once the cage was mounted to the shell, they put it through the photometric testing to see what I mentioned just a couple moments ago, about how much light was emitted through the mask. And then they took that feedback and then made another model and moved the cage physically up or down, in or out on the shell to figure out what that would look like, and kept doing that process. And they went through about 3 to 4 major changes where they printed a full shell using the FDM 3D printing to get the photometric testing correct. And again, that's probably, to me, one of the most kind of mind-blowing things putting on this mask is how great the sight lines are. And I know when I first posted this mask on thegoalnet.com, a lot of people that weren't used to wearing Sportmask were asking me, do you notice the big center bar? And I can astoundingly say not at all. And that is also one of the other more subtle changes on this mask between the previous Pro3 and the new Pro3i, is that the center bar has actually gotten a little bit bigger as well. The other key thing that changed with this mask that was done using some of the CAD design is actually the shape of the ridges, and they were improved to design the deflection angle to make sure that the mask was as safe as possible. One of the great quotes that sticks out with me speaking with Tony ahead of getting this mask is that he believes the mask should function like a turtle shell, where it is as stiff as hard as possible, and that it has ridges to keep the mask further away from your head, and the density, the strength of the mask, as well as the stiffness, rigidity, and the deflection angles will actually deflect the puck away from your head. And the key, again, is like a turtle shell, the hardest, strongest shapes possible to protect the goaltender. And that's one of the reasons that it was very key to them to update the deflection angles. Another key improvement that was used with the CAD, again, that's computer-aided design, was making sure that the mask is perfectly symmetrical. One of the things that many people don't realize is that when you're making things by hand, there's an element of human error. If you think about yourself trying to cut a piece of paper with scissors, and you tried to cut the paper perfectly in half, even if you measured half the length of the paper and tried to cut it in a straight line, you're never gonna quite get a straight line, and that's effectively what human error is. Versus if you had a robot that had a trained path and was told to cut the paper in half, it would give you a perfectly straight line, or within a few tenths of an inch basically every single time. And CAD would be one of the tools that would be used to help the robot understand the shape it had to cut. So using that same analogy, when a mask maker makes a mold of a mask or makes a mask shell, there's going to be a little bit of human error in each mask, and each mask is probably going to be slightly off. But Sportmask's goal with using the CAD design was to try and make a perfectly symmetrical mask so that they minimized the natural human error as much as possible during their mask making process. And one of the other key things that allowed them to do was create 4 different sizes of shells that are perfectly optimized. Traditionally, when many mask companies make a new shell, they just kind of add material off to the back here, off to the top here, extend the chin out, but they're not actually really changing the size of the mask. So the ridges, hypothetically, might be in exactly the same place, even though it's a small, medium, and large mask, and the size of the person's forehead would change, and therefore the location of the ridges should change. So once Sportmask had a digitized version of their mask shell, they were able to create 4 different mask sizes that are all perfectly symmetrical and perfectly designed for the size head that they are supposed to fit on. So one of the other subtle changes as well with the new Sportmask 3i is that the foam inside the mask here is actually changed. So at first blush, this is not black, there's no orange, there's no molded foam inside of it, there's no neon green. So it may not be obvious that the foam is changed versus some of the other mask models on the market have brand name foams in them or have high density foams, etc. But what did change is that Sportmask updated the padding inside this mask to use the exact same padding that goes in their NHL client masks and the custom-made masks. And previously, this foam was not available in the standard retail masks. So this is a very nice upgrade. This is a hypoallergenic foam, so it should be very safe and stink-free long-term. And I can say that just, and I've worn this mask probably 5 to 6 times now, but you'll even notice it just wearing it the first time. It is a very soft, very comfortable foam on your head, and that's one of the other first things you may notice aside from the sight lines is just this mask is very, very comfortable. There's some other masks I've demoed where even though I really like those masks after getting used to them, there's definitely a transition period because the foams feel different on your head. This was one of the few masks I've tried on where instantly it was comfortable and I liked the way it fit on my head. The other big improvement on this is that based on Sportmask's third-party testing, that means Sportmask didn't do the testing. They sent it out to a lab that is very neutral to do the testing. They found that the padding inside this mask is 30% better at impact absorption than the standard padding that they were previously using at retail. So aside from being very comfortable and very sanitary, this also should be a safer foam. Anybody that follows my accounts knows that mask safety is a huge thing to me. And I unfortunately don't have the bandwidth to test as much as I'd like to test with masks. A lot of it's just empirical. Is it comfortable? Do I get headaches when I get hit with it? Do I get ringing? But I will try and, when I do a full-on review on this mask later on, try and convey that. I know personally I've come to be a bit of a believer in the thicker foams, but knowing that Sportmask tested it, very curious to see my own kind of feelings on it. But overall, again, the padding's extremely comfortable and the safety will be an ongoing thing that I will test use after use. So the most obvious upgrade to this mask is the one that I've skipped and probably saved for last, but that is actually the construction of the shell. As you can see, if we zoom in, there's a weave material in there that's a chevron-like pattern, and that is called Enegra. If you think you've heard of Enegra before, that's because it was a very common material a few years ago in hockey sticks. According to Sportmask, there are different grades of Enegra, so don't think that all grades are created equal. Enegra is essentially a product family with different products within it. And according to Sportmask, this is a full Enegra shell, and you can see looking all over, I don't see any areas that do not have Enegra obvious. Backplate, I believe, is fiberglass here, but the full front shell, you can see all of that Enegra weave inside of it. So according to Sportmask, they believe this is the absolute best material to make a mask out of. And basically they feel that the only reason this material isn't more common in the industry right now is just because the cost of it. This is significantly more expensive than carbon fiber, which is what was previously used by Sportmask. And to quantify that cost difference that I just referenced, this mask, the material used to make it, the grade of Enegra that Sportmask is using, is actually 10 times more expensive than the carbon fiber they were previously using. And that gets to the point why they feel that even though this is an obvious candidate, in their opinion, to make the best mask shells, it's not more common, is just due to the cost. And the interesting part about this we'll end the video with, but that will actually be the retail cost of this mask. The other benefits to Enegra is it is light. It might be a tad heavier than carbon fiber, but it's in the same general ballpark in the weight. But the big benefit you're getting is the rigidity, and that goes back to the turtle shell analogy that I was using earlier that Tony shared with me the one time that we spoke. And this material, again, according to Sportmask, is way more rigid than traditional carbon fiber. And the other advantage is that it lays better. There's no seam, so there's no weak points in the mask. It's all one piece, you can see. So if there's carbon fiber and there's joints or there's seams in that carbon fiber, anywhere there's a joint or a seam, that's essentially a weak point where your mask could fail. And with this Enegra fiber, as I'm told, it has no seams or joints, which means that it's going to be basically evenly strong throughout the whole mask, and there should be no weak points. And this gets to, basically every single thing on this mask is new, other than I'll say some signature Sportmask elements, which we'll touch on last, is that they actually use a new resin as well. And the new resin used with this Enegra is a specific high impact, high grade resin. So that's a good look at the inside of the shell, and then as you can see, paints up and it's pretty much, you know, going to look like any shell. As you can see, I mentioned I've used this mask quite a bit already, so we've got some puck marks on there from probably a few errant slap shots, but don't like them when they happen necessarily, but still very good testing points for the mask. So everybody loves tuning in to see the weight of masks, so let's throw this on the scale and see where this is. Although everybody always wants the lightest gear, I'd put masks up there maybe second to chest protectors, where sometimes a little bit heavier might be reassuring to a goalie because it's going to be a little beefier, which might give a goalie more confidence or more safety. But obviously with new materials on the market, it should be very easy to get a one of these new space age materials that's a good combination of light and protective. So as we can see, we're coming in at about 2.89, so call that 2.9 pounds. I would say that is right in the middle right now between where masks are being made right now. Just as an example, like the Bauer VTX and the CCM GFL Pro both come in somewhere around 2.5, 2.6 pounds. And the Bauer 960 XPM, which is probably like the most popular mask in hockey, or at least the most popular like pro level mask, that comes in at around 2.9 or right around 3 pounds. So based off that info, I'd say Sportmask comes right in the middle, which is good. This is still going to be a lightweight, comfortable mask, but the benefits of the Enegra fiber, where it may weigh a touch more than carbon fiber, is why, we're seeing this mask come in at like 2.9 instead of 2.5 or 2.6. But to reiterate, it's definitely not heavy. We got to put this in the context of how much lighter these new carbon fiber, these new Enegra shells are compared to the older masks that were 100% fiberglass. So this is still a really good lightweight design. So as we focus on some of the classic sport mask elements that are still in here, as I mentioned, there's a lot of things new on this mask, from the center bar of the cage, to the size of the cage, to the testing using, to the face opening, to the shell material, to the foam. There are still some classic sport mask elements on this mask that have not been lost. So first and foremost is the chin. Pretty classic sport mask design, which is a bit unique, is that we have a deflection ridge out in front of the cage. With many masks, the cage just kind of sits there. We can see that deflection ridge right there, which actually gives the cage almost a little bit of recess down there. Secondly are the oval shaped vent holes. If you ever see a goalie on TV and their mask doesn't have a logo on the paint job, but it has the oval shaped holes, that means it's a sport mask. A lot of other companies use round holes. Sportmask has gone with the oval, and the kind of triangular shape there at the ear is always a hallmark for me. We do have the rubber hardware underneath the cage mount there, which will help protect your paint and also potentially reduce ringing as well. On the back is another one of the classic sport mask elements, is that they don't use the 5-star harness. They actually use 4 individual straps. So there is no strap on the top of the center there. So you're gonna get a more open back plate aesthetically, but the 4-point harness. And if we look at the top, these screws are actually on the back of the mask, which is pretty cool if we think about durability. I assume most people go through a clip or two a season getting hit on the front of the mask, but because the clips aren't there, that issue is eliminated. And then the bottom 2 clips are pretty standard, where they just come out to the front. So good workability for painting. A lot of people get bothered by the 5-star style harness, so that avoids that. Next up is the chin cup. This is one of the most unique features for me for sport masks. You can actually hear that coming through on the video. That is a hard plastic chin cup that then has a foam comfort area where your chin actually touches. So it's very thin and very light, but a little bit different, where most of the chin cups are a piece of like molded high density foam. So it's definitely a unique sport mask element. And then on here, we've got the very hard triangular cut there for the chin drop. So a lot of those elements there, again, from our classic Sportmask. And of course, as well, I touched on the new center bar earlier, but all the Sportmasks as well have the beefy center bar. Let's just take one more look over on some of the features here on the mask. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, Sportmask and Otney have joined forces, and that's basically allowed them to create 100% of the mask in-house between the two companies, or 95% if we look at things like the elastic aren't being produced in-house. But again, the cages are made locally in Ontario. The shell is made in-house in Ontario. The foams are actually sourced, so this foam inside the mask is sourced from Canada. I believe the material for the sweatband is sourced from Canada. The chin cups are made in Canada. And then interestingly enough, Sportmask actually has within their corporate family a machine that makes the clips. So these cheap, basic, inexpensive clips that you'd assume would be made in China or something like that, these are actually made in Canada as well. So pretty cool that basically every single piece of this helmet is made in Canada. The elastic as well, I was told that was made in Mississauga. So some of these components that we take for granted that many companies purchase via outsourcing, and this goes well beyond hockey, is made in Canada. So that's really, really cool. So if the country of origin is an important buying decision for you when looking at a mask, Sportmask is definitely taking that to the nth degree. And it is something that they consciously think about. So this mask isn't just made in Canada, it's made of Canadian materials as well. The cage material is Canadian steel. The elastic is made in Canada elastic. So that's a lot of things that Sportmask puts a lot of effort into that we shouldn't take for granted. So as we close up our mask review, as I mentioned, the price was something very interesting to look at on this mask. The previous Pro3i mask retailed for about $9.50 Canadian, and this new mask is supposed to come in at $8.49 Canadian, so about a $50 price drop. So the old one was $8.99, call it $900. The new one's $8.49, call that $8.50. So $50 price drop for a significantly upgraded mask, and with the exchange rate for us Americans, this should come in at about $6.50. Now keep in mind, again, this is not in retail yet, so if a few things with the pricing or whatnot changes, please just use that as a barometer. But as you can tell, that is an extremely good price for the quality that you are getting in this mask, as well as the made in Canada aspect. So if you have any questions, please head over to thegoalnet.com and post them there. Really appreciate you watching this video, and tune back in maybe in another month or so, and I will do a initial impressions, which is kind of an early review on this mask. And until then, this is the GoalNet signing out.